M. The Media Project. With fast-moving and sweeping changes to our economy in the works, we all need to reconsider how our investments are best placed. At Partners in Housing, we believe your money is best placed locally. Utilized to increase value and provide stable and desirable housing to your neighbors. Contact Partners in Housing to find out how you can participate in local housing opportunities by joining the Partners in Housing Fund. Look us up at partnersinhousingvt.com or email us at partnersinhousingvt@gmail.com.
It's another afternoon in a hot, steamy, humid west side of the mountains here in the great state of Vermont. And you, ladies and gentlemen, are listening to another episode of the Innovato 2 podcast. And with me in the virtual studio on the east side, we got west side, east side going on, is my good friend in White River Junction, Ryan Munn.
Hey, good to be here, Scott. Thanks for co-hosting as usual. And really excited to share this conversation. We continue to dive in about AI and where it's going to impact us. Today, we're drawing from across the nation, actually out in California, with a guest that is deeply involved in business and AI development and has founded a research and development firm called Consorvia. And today, we have with us Christina Fedor. And thank you, Christina, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan and Scott. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Really glad to have you. So glad that we met and got a chance to get to know what you're working on. Really excited to have you share that with us today. But first, give us a little bit of background on you. Who's Christina and how did you find yourself where you're at today?
How did I find myself? Oof. Okay, that's a little good. How did I find myself? Let's see, how much time do we have?
That's very Jungian of you, Ryan.
Oh, yeah. Good deep.
I want to, just kind of start with earlier today, I was walking my dog around the neighborhood and listening to a talk, and the person who was giving the talk mentioned that there's a time in our lives when it's really helpful to kind of look inwardly, right, and ask ourselves questions, and that can be kind of a healing type of conversation with ourselves. And then there's a moment in life, or many moments in life, where it's actually the most helpful thing that we can do is look outside of ourselves and ask questions like, can we be of service, and for whom can we be of service? And that itself can also be, really healing kind of question. And so I think, that like I want to sort of set up this little story about myself with something that resonated with me today. And so I'm in this, current phase of my life where the most important question is, how can I be of service to others? And so Consorvia, the studio, was an early conception on my part, actually with a founder 4 years ago in 2020. And we were building a totally different company at that time. I was in, Silicon Valley. I had left my job, in New York City, and where I was in the banking world. And for a moment, really, and I wasn't very happy in that world. And this is sort of like a common trope these days. So many people are finding themselves in this paradigm that just feels like it doesn't resonate really deeply. I think this is, and I just want to set this up and kind of point our attention in this conversation to this very thing, right? Where I think so many of us today are asking these questions of like, why doesn't my life or the work I'm doing or the way culture is going or the way our government is going, right? There's all these systems and they don't feel right. So this is something that I was acutely sensitive to, very aware of, really my whole life. And I was just, before we hopped on the show, it was just, for the sake of the audience, I was talking about my experience moving from LA and the suburbs of LA as a kid to rural Virginia, and kind of learning the ways of being a hay farmer. And I had horses, and and I would have had goats and chickens and all the others if my parents had let me. They did that. They were themselves not really farm people, ironically. So I had a stopping factor there, but it was such a beautiful experience, though, to be in connection with nature and with space and with silence. And these are all kind of like patterns and themes that, anyone who's been on a kind of healing journey is familiar with and aware of. So I had the blessing and good fortune to be very much in connection with those ideas, in my own life. And so, fast forward, I'm in New York, and generally pretty unhappy with, this feeling that I have to make these great sacrifices in the quality of my life, right, in order to step out into the world and contribute value in a certain way. And so the first chance I got, to step outside of that and take what they call a leap of faith and go be an entrepreneur, which was actually always native to me. I started my first eBay business when I was 13, and then I started a services business when I was 17. And so I was just, out there grassroots, like doing the thing, any opportunity I could. So it was really like a return back to what felt very familiar to me and definitely more resonant, going back to Silicon Valley and starting a business. And where that business failed, through COVID and through all sorts of general like haphazards and mistakes, and it's the minefield. We don't necessarily need to get into that today, but I want to mention that, failure for sure had definitely been a part of the journey, for me, and like learning how to adapt to a new culture, a new ecosystem, a new business, new industry. I just really got excited about taking that on and learning as quickly and as well as I could, how to again contribute value to the world, and technology opens up, this entire new set of tools, that allows us to think really, I think, in a way that is very grand, can be very bold, can be very big. Right. And especially digital technologies. And of course, this is like right at the cusp of like when AI was starting to kind of in 2019, 2020, you started to see a lot of companies, promote themselves as AI companies. And it was really to kind of get the VCs, focusing their attention in certain ways. But that was right at the cusp of, like what we now are, we live in kind of the AI maybe bubble or the AI explosion today. And so that was my entrance to tech. And so, Consorvia was something that at the time I thought a lot about. The name has meaning to it, and I want to get into that. I thought a lot about what it means to go places together. So the company originally conceived was really like designed to facilitate people gathering in certain places, right? And so the idea was that, people when they gather together in certain places, that's kind of like the fundamental, that's like the beginning of maybe community, or maybe it's like a ritual. But in other words, like it's a place where, intelligence starts to kind of crystallize in a way that is resonant with the collective, with something that survives. And so, Consorvia today has taken on definitely a new shape. We are thinking of ourselves as an R&D studio. So we're studio. We're true to the culture of LA. As I've always known it, we're kind of a bit of a collection of misfits. We're indie in our own ways. We're asking questions that I think are overall, from what I gather, not conventionally asked. And we have all sorts of reasons, in the way that we think about why those questions are not being asked today, why it's so important to ask these questions really fundamentally about, meaning, about where we're going, when we build things, and we ask why are we doing this, and who does it serve? So we create the space for that.
So you have a background where you grew up, and your formative years were spent in both urban and rural environments. How did that affect the way that you've sort of curated what Consorvia is doing? You're asking a lot of big ticket questions through Consorvia and offering people data. And and let me also ask you at the same time, are you helping people devise more questions rather than just giving answers, or what's your approach there?
Yeah. Well, so I want to start with, we start with the fundamentals, which is we create a space and we take our time. And I know it sounds sort of like, almost simplistic, right? To make that statement, but as we know, when we're in a transaction oriented, society that moves, and we all feel it. And we've all heard this narrative said, 1,000 times. It feels like it's going fast. So yeah, first and foremost, we create space and create time. And what's interesting is that when you allow those things to exist, space and time to exist, you start like the questions that are otherwise unattended to, they kind of just emerge on their own. I was chatting earlier today. We're always kind of reflective on like what it is that we're doing. We're self-reflective. And we were talking a lot about, creating these conditions for autopoiesis, right? Which is a term that was coined by a very famous cognitive scientist, Francisco Varela, whose work I'm deeply affected and impacted and influenced by. And at the highest level I could say about him was that he really insisted that the mind, it was something that like shows up in the world in forms and formats and ways that, had generally been understudied or underdeveloped and in our understanding. And so this, this is something that, really inspires me, and by extension, us at the studio is that we're asking questions with the insistence fundamentally that when we do this, when we participate in this collective kind of meaning making exercise, that it all has to fit together. So it all does orient us. It's in a way that like we're going to assume that we don't know where it's going to take us. But if we give ourselves the space and the time to ask these questions, that, that like higher level orientation emerges of its own on its own right. So that's the autopoietic kind of function, right, of space and time. I mean, again, it's truly like very simplistic in many ways. And I think, as we evolve, there will certainly be, more like sort of formatting in the way that we tend to, like, as we grow, you start to have to, create more of an infrastructure, a clearer sense of direction for those of us who, come in and join us as we build more companies and we kind of take on more activities. But still at this core kind of like level, this fundamental, level, just articulating to each other, the fact that we are sharing space and sharing time, and that this is a place where it's okay to ask the questions and to bring the topics to the table. This is actually like the kind of groundwork for innovation. So this is an interesting point I want to make, which is that, I've done some studying of what innovation is. So it's been a long time, while I was working, like I said, in New York, or I was, on the hay farm, or in Virginia, or, when I was in Silicon Valley, I've always had this desire to sort of step outside of my own experience and observe it and go, okay, what's going on here? And, and ask, of course, in my case, questions about innovation, right? And you do that when you acknowledge that there is a collective need for something that like turns us in a different direction, right? We want to like steer this like ship. I'm speaking about America. And I always do when I'd say we, but I say it's America that I'm talking about. We want to steer the ship a certain way, and we might look at the way that, those in power have influence are steering the ship and say, okay, like, there's some trade-offs that are being made here. It doesn't feel like it's going in a direction, again, that's resonant with where I or we think it should go. But why? And I want to know, why is it that it's not going the right way? And so, I can tell you now from having worked with, gosh, I don't know, I don't keep count, but a lot of founders over the last couple of years in a lot of different capacities, that what continues to inspire me in the work that I do is that when, you're able to ask the right questions, and, you do it here on, and this is part of the reason why podcasts are such an important new like kind of forum for us to engage with each other. It's an incredible thing that we get to do, to be on podcasts and share and exchange ideas with each other, because it's in the space of dialogue that we start to reveal to each other what is possible. And if we don't construct that space and allow certain dialogue to emerge, then it's almost impossible to know, like what is possible, because the possible only, exists in this relationship, in this sort of relating space. Possible is
part of the contemporary paradigm has been, right, for some time, I'd say for decades, like business plans and societal plans aren't their best when you come from the standpoint of what's the minimum we have to do to, make this work, or what's the minimum amount of time and resources and money, to make some, it's like, well, that might not necessarily be the right place to start, right? Like, how about we start with, what is the dream, and why, what are the big ticket, reasons why we'd want to enact something, right? Whether it's a business model or a policy, or, and then work from there on what's possible today, or incrementally, how do we get to the aspired, but like a lot of our current time seems to be a reductive approach. Does that make sense? Of like, what's the least we should do, or what's the least we can do? And that, I don't know. Ryan, you're smiling too. Maybe you have some thoughts additional.
Well, I mean, I kind of want to share like this story, right? So Christina, give us a little bit more detail on the name Consorvia and the inception, your co-founders and other team members, and how that sort of really, from you started thinking about these things, you've had all this sort of diverse experience that sort of drove you to sort of asking these questions, but someone you met or you started having certain ideas, looking for somebody, like what kind of happened there where sort of Consorvia was birthed?
Yeah, you have to go, now we have to go back in time again. So it's one of those movies, right? Go back, go forward, and go back. So Consorvia, the name is a combination of Latin words, and so I have to now reveal that I am a Latin nerd. I was a classics major in college, but even before that, I had spent I think in total my 15 years of my life have been dedicated to learning, how to engage with a foreign language, right? To explore an entirely new world, new to me, right? New world. And what's beautiful about that, I just want to kind of, again, cue into this a little bit because it is relevant to when we get to AI. We'll talk about, how that affects my view on AI. But I think it's, there's this magic that, we're able to learn the rules and the syntax and of a language system that, that it allows us to mobilize the mind to travel to another place, another time, another culture, and actually fully immerse ourselves in it. Like, this isn't just something that we do at the surface level, like, at as I was doing it, let's say, right? You do it with this kind of attitude of almost full immersion. And so it is, like, to me, magic in plain sight. I mean, it's readily available. And I know, I think music is another one of these kind of domains of knowledge that, you learn certain, like, kind of rule-based, you learn the rules and you learn the sort of system of rules. And then from there, you can really interact with and engage and fully immerse into an entire, like, landscape of the mind that becomes your world. And so, that to me was always, like, very, very interesting. But in the context of, being a humanities scholar, and in the context of the modern day, like, I had confronted always this question of, like, well, what are you going to do with that? Like, how is it relevant to, engage with something that is, like, for most considered to be totally irrelevant to the means and modes of production, in modern society. And, I have to say that my experience on the farm taught me a lot of things, but one of the things that I think is so interesting to share here is that you really start to inhabit and become fully immersed as a farmer in what is otherwise kind of known to be like a systems thinking point of view, right? Again, there's a way of thinking about systems. If you can think about systems as something that is kind of ordained by logic. And so that would be kind of more like a mathematical or even engineer's approach, right? That you kind of look for the logic that guides you through the system and gives it structure and order, and therefore makes it, like, interpretable or comprehensible. And then there's this other way of understanding a system, and it's just being in it and just, like, experiencing it and acting in it. And so, like, basically cultivating agency in a way where, like, you have to take on, an understanding of these new rules in order to do what you need to do in that system. And so, it's an interesting kind of feature of the mind, right? That we can immerse in something without really understanding the logic of what we're doing, but we can still do it. And so I think this is something that, gives me, not only, I would say, the confidence to, like, shift into something like AI and start to work with it in a certain way, right? Is you can work with it by immersing yourself in it, without, like, necessarily understanding the kind of, like, the rules of the game. Although I think learning the rules is incredibly helpful. So I don't want to, like, make any misstatements there. But at the same time, it's like, I would encourage us generally to think bigger than, like, this narrative of, like, agency, all right, that is currently kind of capturing a lot of us, and where a lot of us are going, like, do I have agency? Do I not have agency? Does AI, like, hurt my agency? And we even think of it as my agency, right? And
It's like, you only have it. You only have it if you have it, right? I have agency over this technology, and I determine its best use for me. Without this precedent, like, all is lost, right? Kind of a thing. This seems to be a major priority for you in everything you've said so far. Both agency and also humanity, injecting humanity in the way we create and then diffuse technology to the masses, right? Can you offer some real examples of best practices in your estimation and in your experience?
Yeah, so there's, I think, really great investors. By the way, we ask, like, what great, it's a relevant thing to bring up investors in response to this, because I think one of the things in the innovation ecosystem overall, that, like, is super important to be mindful of is that, capital does, right? Today, capital is what makes that kind of like catalyzes our ability to materialize ideas in the world, in a certain way, to realize our visions, our ideas. And for most of us, these days, we have to rely on somebody else to bring capital to the table. And that can actually be a really powerful thing. If like those of us who are in the process of really harnessing insights and working with ideas, like at the level of abstraction, at the level of ideas, right? There's an entire skill set, and a lot of that's captured by specialists in scientific fields or in academic fields. These are people who really know how to work with abstract ideas. I think that's really important for us, as we think about the entire landscape of innovation, because it's this like refining of the ideas in the kind of purely creative space that's like established for the purpose of, just getting really great, deep, rich, nuanced ideas to emerge, like, so that we like, again, this is a vague term, but those of us, let's say, who are focused on, the production of ideas and materializing those into the world, into something we would call an innovation, that it's important for us to like kind of inhabit that process by which the ideas are refined, they become comprehensible, intelligible to us, it makes sense to us in certain ways that we can think, okay, what can I like combine with the idea of that then makes it, something else, right? This is like the beginnings of creativity. And so I think it's important to like have some discernment when we're talking about, like working with humanist principles, to have some discernment as to like what part of the innovation stack or process are we working with right now? Are we in the like idea process, which itself is its own process? It's a dedicated process, that exists for the purpose of refining ideas. But that refinement is only so good as, let's say, like the next step in the process, which is understanding what your affordances are, right? Do you have the right technology, the right tools, to act those ideas into the world? And so this is like where some of the, like, again, great investors, I think can be really like a meaningful contributor to the innovation process by kind of guiding like these parts of the innovation stack, the idea kind of cultivation, the insight cultivation process, and then the technical kind of development, that implementation of the techne. I think that, like that all of it needs, a bigger kind of like view, right? The meta view of what the market bears today, how are people behaving in a particular domain or particular space, and how can that idea combined with the technology and affordance like move in the world in a certain way. And so I think like these, like at least for the purpose of this conversation, I'll say like these three aspects of the innovation stack really do need to talk to each other really, really well. And so when you're thinking about, like bringing people into the center of what you do, I think first thing is like you have to like, there has to be a way for like the people who really specialize in these three areas of innovation to talk to each other. Right? There has to be dialogue, there has to be conversation, there has to be a shared view, of like not just the future. And we talk a lot about the future, and in a way that can actually exacerbate the kind of like the scarcity mindset of like, oh, we have to kind of step over each other, right, to like get to the future faster. So I, as much as I love the future and I love talking about the future, I think it's really important to actually like really settle ourselves into the moment and say, can I talk to this other person, right? Can I talk to a person who inhabits the world of ideas? If I'm a technologist or if I'm an investor, can I speak to the folks who are building the technology and just have a conversation with them? Again, like, without any particular, sort of like a drive to a specific future. Like the vision is very, very important. We get to that at some point because I think it's incredibly important to have a point of view, to have a vision, especially in the age of AI. But for the purpose of, again, like starting with the fundamentals, which is, are we building things that resonate with people, that are like useful for people ultimately, then like just building the skill set of having the conversation and listening to people comes first and foremost. And what we've seen, I think, in the culture of technology, over the last 30 or 40 years, or we could probably draw some alternative timelines here, but I would say, at least in my the way that I've kind of encountered the technology culture of technology, is that like the kind of classic paradigm is known for for like thinking more about how to step out in front of the rest, right? Stepping in front of the pack and sort of bypassing these kind of skills that enable us to think communally, to think in a way that, like harnesses the deep insights and respects fundamentally the deep insights from all of these different kind of contributors.
Driven by data. Driven by technology. Driven by community development. Driven by the need to get results for your project. SM Graves Associates. Delivering real estate development to you, including project management and pre-development services with a keen focus on delivering community-oriented projects. We build profitable projects that respond to the needs of your neighborhood. Join the SMG family. Find us at smgravesassociates.com.
Sounds like an argument to slow down fast money.
Yeah, I think though so there's, especially in AI, there are folks who are kind of putting out this cry to slow the production of AI down. And I think there's, on the one hand, I think it's possible to say that, with this like fire hose of capital that has enabled modern LLMs, to scale up as quickly as they have. And it has felt like a kind of like almost a new breed of colonizing forces, right? That all of a sudden this exists and it's really important. And like, you have to kind of grapple with it somehow. And we're all sort of scrambling to figure out, well, what do we do with this? And so like the first kind of reaction to that, the slow down reaction, I think it's wise in the sense that, we understand that there's some kind of like contrivance there. There's something that was artificially induced, that if AI emerges of its own kind of natural time, then we ask, like, would it happen in this way? Or would it emerge through these channels? Or would it come about for these reasons? So I think actually, I tend to think that a better way of responding to, this like, the AI bubble feels like a bubble, right? And there's folks who agree or disagree with this, but I think it feels like a bubble. It's artificially contrived. And I would say that the maybe a different kind of response, other than to say, well, like, slow it down, is to say, like, are there unique ways, like, in which we can work with this technology, right, that allow us to position it in certain domains, or allows us to use it in a way that helps like kind of close the gap, for some folks who otherwise, are like sort of like woefully unready for this technology to engage with their lives, right? As it disrupts things like work and relationships and our sense of and connection to place, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this goes on. Almost everything really is possible, right, in terms of what's disrupted here. so I think, it's not so much a matter of like, can we slow this down, but it's more a matter of, can we really craft it in a careful way that, again, engages like the right kind of like positioning, right? Can it be positioned in the world in a certain way that brings again humans back to the kind of way it's you say it's humans loop, but I think even more than that, I think that's even insufficient. That the kind of the broader narratives now, humans in the loop. You see that in like the chatbot space. Folks talk about humans in the loop there, and they're just talking about human reinforcement learning, basically. And so, that can still be, I think insufficient as a response, when we're trying to, again, you're asking this question, how do we get people back into the center of things? And so it really comes from like engaging with your world in a way that like allows for many types of views to inhabit that world, so that it's never really your worldview, right? You're building into a world that's not yours, it's ours. It's a world that's shared by many. And so building into that world that's shared by many is like, to me, the most fundamental, is the first step. And then, by the way, it takes quite a dedicated effort, to build that worldview where you say, yeah, my worldview is shared by many. It really is. It's not a native thing to many of us, I think, in the United States.
It's antithetical to a winners take all methodology. And so I think when we talk about slow money, it's not slow down the money. It's changing that perspective between, how can I turn this millions of dollars into billions of dollars, into how do I invest in what raises the tide for everybody. And so you answered the question, but in a very broad sense. So I want you to showcase your Latin geek a little bit. Consorvia, define the word. Tell me about the companies that you are researching and developing.
Yeah. So it comes from the word consource, which is a term that applies to, it's like so much more than your good friend, an amicus or amica. It's a person who shares a fate with you, and via is a road. So we're thinking of ourselves as a kind of a meeting place, right, for folks who recognize, who hold this mutual recognition of shared fate. And so, it like, we're thinking a lot about, this kind of middle path between, what is considered to be public domain knowledge and private intellectual property. And so this is definitely an operative question for us at Consorvia. Because I think, we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, but what's so interesting to me about technology today, and specifically, our digital technologies, is that it truly violates this distinction between the public and the private. And it's difficult as an individual, we might think we have at the individual level an answer to what the boundary should be, right, between public and private. But actually, in practice, the vast majority of us are so darn willing to engage in public, in the public arena, that we end up, giving away, we consent to things that we might not if we were so committed to privacy, for example, at the individual level. So in other words, I think fundamentally the interest of the public, continues to sort of guide our lives, and it really takes the wheel, for some of us consciously and some of us less consciously. But truly we're creatures that, deeply desire to live in public. So we're thinking about that quite a lot. The company I'm most excited to talk about, that we're building, is, it's a a brand new kind of entertainment company. We are really disrupting the way in which young people engage with AI. And so the name of the company is the Zillies. You can look us up, zillies.world, and you'll see if you look us up, there are 13 incredible characters, each of which has a musical personality. This is the brainchild, the genius of my amazing co-founder, who himself is an esteemed musician. And there's an incredible backstory, which I don't know if we have time for that today, but
what do you something to go look for and learn about too? So you just said, just to reiterate, you said Zillies, not world, so Zillies.
Zilliez, Zillies.world. Yes. And you can find us on TikTok. And we're on YouTube, and you'll definitely want to subscribe to the YouTube, because we're going to make some big moves there in the coming year. So definitely stay tuned. But we're reimagining, like I said, the way in which young people work with AI, and our big North Star is, the power of human creativity. And so we fundamentally believe, that in the coming age where, this kind of symbiosis of human and machine really starts to determine the many, many, many outcomes of our lives, that our way through that is actually very much determined by the way in which we, allow each other to have, this creative freedom, right? So freedom is, I think, a fundamentally creative act. And I could go on a total tangent there and talk more about that. But for the sake of this, I want to say that we're quite excited. We're going to be launching a companion app that allows kids to spend time playing with characters in a way that really kids have not been able to. So we have, a very kind of participatory attitude towards entertainment. We believe that there's a way in which, young people can engage with characters and with storytelling that allows them to actually develop and cultivate, their skill set, and with respect to how they form relationships, how they create, how they act and express and move in the world. And so, we've all been through the education system, and we all know that all of us, I haven't met a single person yet who doesn't have, a personal story about how the education system let them down, or let their kids down. And so this is in many ways, again, not necessarily a response directly to that, but it is informed by our experiences, moving through the world and recognizing that, that inside all of us, there is an artist who's looking for expression. And the kind of theme for me, I guess, today is that part of ourselves really needs space, and it needs tools, and it needs inspiration.
It's not a facet. It's not an add-on. It's on the menu of a profound and fundamental human need and desire, right? And so it's funny, isn't it, that people who have cultivated a life of that and have cultivated and flexed their creative muscles, they bring that into the digital space. Conversely, those that have had that suppressed or have suppressed it within themselves also bring those whatever habits they have to the digital space, right? You had...
Yeah, bring it amplified.
I don't know how you feel about this, but to me, it seems that we have to fundamentally, before you introduce, it's not that this is not an argument to not introduce young people to digital technology. It is that I think the order in which you do things is you cultivate your creativity through a variety of medium. It doesn't matter what the medium is, it's whatever is attractive to that individual person. But by having that fundamental skill set, when you start incorporating an interaction within the digital space, including you're learning your own design of a digital space, you bring a lot more humanity and process even to it, right? That helps you to really design. Better designers understand. There's no. It's no secret, right? When people of high that perform at a high level in their job, whether they're engineers, other scientists, or people who set policy, people who run businesses, right? And then you find out, oh yeah, he plays in a band. She paints. Like they all. It's not just something they did as kids, right? Because you are flexing those intellectual muscles we don't need one or the other. We need to flex the entirety of our brains in order to be at our highest operative level.
I think that's right. There's a promise for AI that that far exceeds, the kind of hype of large language models, which in my estimation is it's really one of the least interesting use cases for AI. But it's there's a lot of commercial, as we're seeing, tremendous commercial potential there. But what is so much richer and more nuanced, and I think was the original promise for AI, we look back to the folks like Seymour Papert and Alan Kay, who, were thinking in the 60s about, what it would be like for children to work with computers so that they could interact with this, new and emerging understanding on the part of all of us as to what it is that, like, what is reality? What is it that, we're able to do? What is this universe, doing? It's not, it's nothing less than a kind of a miracle that we have the ability to sit down and talk to each other like this, across the internet. And so the fact, that we can transmit information as we do, it tells us something really phenomenal about the way that the world is constructed, and
we had a conversation along these lines last week, right, Ryan, with Peter Voss, as far as a vision of, AI is an individualized tool that each person has but is there in service to that individual, right? To maximize that individual's creativity, thinking, which is different than where we've come so far with AI, generally speaking, right? Because I'm more interested in hearing what your ideas about that are, but we're not necessarily realizing that vision today. I don't think, not yet.
No, I don't think so. And again, I think it's primarily because it's so commercially viable, right? To take the information that, is already legible. Like the internet is this great, kind of noosphere. It captured a lot of, these inputs over the last, 30, 40 years or so. And so, like, to be able to kind of collapse the time distance between those inputs, and then metabolize them with this artificial mind, is like, it's a tremendous feat into itself. But it only gets at one function of the mind itself. And we build AI systems in large part to help us understand what the mind does and what it's capable of. And so I think, if we are still committed to that inquiry, which again is the kind of original inquiry of artificial intelligence, then it's important to also ask questions of like, well, what are we leaving behind, right? If we pursue this particular paradigm, are there, again, this is again my interests in Varela's work, right, where he insisted that there's like kind of multiple facets of the mind, and the mind can, it's embodied, it's enacted. There's ways that the mind makes its own appearances and metabolizes information that then become understandable to us. And so to the extent, that, for example, we start to ask questions like, well, can we work with, is there a way that, for example, artificial intelligence can help us, contribute to the sort of the symbolic nature of our experience. So we're interested, of course, at Zillies, we're working with characters, and characters are like the most fundamental form of information for humans. Humans are, if you go back long enough in human history, you recognize that the first sort of interpretations of the outside world, by the time that you could like sort of say, well, consciousness in a way where self-consciousness emerges on the part of humanity, we recognize that moment in time because it was at that point that humans are constructing symbolic representations of their external conditions. So I think going all the way back there helps us understand potentially what's left behind or what's still on the table for us today. So if we continue to kind of double down on our commitments to, finding new avenues for large language models to enhance productivity, collapse, the time distance between, work and the value that we create, then we're abbreviating this entire spectrum of what the mind is capable of doing. And that is when we're talking about kids, right? And if we're emphasizing to young people that, the way that they should be interacting with computers is with, in this like one sort of part of what the mind is able to do, this one mode of being, then we're simultaneously telling them, oh yeah, that other stuff, that the mind is capable of doing, the creative stuff, that doesn't matter, right? And we already live in that world where, effectively, we live in the world where there's the struggle of the artist is like a common trope, and we accept it and acknowledge it, and we've normalized it. But then like kind of in a tragic irony, we elevate, those artists who can transcend that narrative, and they then become our heroes. I mean, it's no mistake, right, that we put musical artists, far away on top, like they're the kind of cultural kings and queens, of our society. And so that's telling us something about what do we actually value. And I think, it's thus far not been very well recognized by like the tech industry overall. And so what's unique about the time that we live, where we now can build AI, is sufficiently commoditized so that, those of us who value, this other part of what the human mind is capable of doing can step up and say, let's build with AI, and it doesn't have to be AI, right? I mean, there's any kind of tool. We can build worlds with our tools now, and we can not only build those worlds, but we can share those worlds with others. And, and when more and more people step into these worlds that we create with the understanding that the mind is capable of so much richness and nuance and creativity, This is sort of like the groundwork for something that is, I think, very foreign to what we currently inhabit. And I think, that's kind of the tipping point. That's where we're trying to go.
Pathway to actualization, as another guest has mentioned, bringing the individual and the system together as a whole.
You guys are just all very Carl Jung tonight. Like Paul Jung everywhere.
Well, so I really appreciate all the work you're doing, Christina. I want to just have you share how folks can connect with you. I know Zillies is raising. I'm sure that with others in your R&D group soon. So what is the best way for someone interested in learning more to connect and reach out?
Definitely. We have a private Slack group, and we run our conversations and thread our ideas together there. And I would absolutely love to share that space with others who are engaging, in this broader spectrum of innovation and the ideas that support emergent innovation. So if you are a technologist, a builder, an investor, a researcher, an artist of any kind, and you're interested in some of these ideas, then the best way is to reach me directly. I am very reachable by email, Christina@consorvia.co. You can find me there. Like it's Zillies, you can find us. You're gonna find us all over social media more and more. But I encourage you to find. You can find me. I'm somewhat on X. I do post there occasionally. You can. I wouldn't encourage you to follow me. I would encourage you to reach out and send me a DM. I much prefer these kinds of conversations over followers. So don't follow me, please. Just reach out. It's much better. And if you're looking for ways to work with me, or activate your ideas, and you want, a group of folks who will support you in that, then yeah, I think, it's possible that we could be a fit for you. So definitely reach out and yeah, I think that's just the way. It's just reaching out. So email.
Awesome. Sounds good. And we'll have all that info in the show notes. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing the background and the story of Consorvia and the good work that you're doing with Zillies, and look forward to continuing the conversation with you in the future.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been fun.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.